CBS4 and CPT12 present The Governor's Debate.
I'm CBS4 political specialist Shaun Boyd. Welcome to the first live televised governor's debate in campaign 2018. Governor Hickenlooper is term limited, so we have an open seat this year. Our candidates are Jared Polis and Walker Stapleton. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, Shaun.
Congressman Polis is a Democrat. He has represented the 2nd District for the past 9 years. He's 43 years old. He and his partner have 2 kids, ages 7 and 4. His opponent is Republican Walker Stapleton. He is in his 2nd term as state treasurer. He is 44 years old, married with 3 children, ages 10, 7, and 4. So let's get right to some of the toughest issues making news this week. In this first segment, you will each have 30 seconds to answer. The U.S. Senate is expected to confirm Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh tomorrow. Based on what we know, should he be confirmed? And I want a quick yes or no. Jared?
No, of course not. I disagree with his stated opposition to women's reproductive health choices. I think that, by the way, putting everybody in that public setting was in many ways a farce. It should have been anything valid, should have been investigated. But again, I opposed him before those charges were made. I want to be clear because I oppose his fundamental judicial philosophy, which I see as restricting our freedom and failing to rein in an out-of-control imperial presidency.
Okay, we just want to keep this one quick.
Yes.
Mr. Stapleton?
Yes.
Okay.
I believe he should be confirmed. As a father of 2 daughters, 7 and 4, I think it's important that they be respected and taken seriously if somebody does any wrong to them. I'd want that as a dad. But there's no doubt that Washington has made an absolute circus out of this, and now the Senate needs to vote.
Okay, thank you. Both of you have police reports dating back 20 years. I am not suggesting that they are anywhere on par with what Kavanaugh is accused of. But is this history relevant today? Mr. Polis, in one case, you were cited for drag racing under an already suspended license. In another case, you were not charged but admitted to blocking and pushing a female employee, trying to steal documents from you. Mr. Stapleton, you were charged with driving under the influence of alcohol and leaving the scene of an accident. Mr. Polis, I want to start with you. Is Mr. Stapleton's DUI important information when considering his judgment today?
You know, these are all things for the voters to decide whether it's relevant or not. I think people are looking at our whole track record. You know, as you indicated, I was a victim of a theft about 20 years ago. I called the police. They reacted. An arrest was made. I don't think it's right to, drag it up. The person who served her time is since deceased. She still has friends and family in the area.
But I'm asking you about your opponent here, Mr. Stapleton, and his DUI.
Well, again, I mean, it's entirely up to the voters, Shaun. I mean, right, voters will obviously heard what you said, and they've heard a lot of things reported by a lot of media sources. So, I mean, it's not up to, I wasn't going to vote for Walker anyway. I mean, even if he didn't have a DUI.
So, Mr. Stapleton, do the incidents from Mr. Polis' past reveal anything about his character today?
I'm going to leave those incidents up to Mr. Polis, the authorities who wrote up the reports, and the voters of Colorado. I want to focus on this race between Congressman Polis and myself and our different plans for the economic future of Colorado. I want him to explain how he's going to pay for nearly $100 billion of spending, how he's going to triple Colorado's budget obligations. These are the important issues to address. My incident was in my early 20s. I made a mistake. I learned from the mistake. It was the subject of a $1 million ad campaign when I first ran for treasurer, and I've moved on in life.
Okay, thank you. If Kavanaugh is confirmed, the nation's highest court will have a solid conservative majority and could overturn the landmark case, Roe v. Wade, that legalized abortion. It would then be up to states to regulate abortion. Mr. Stapleton, do you think that abortion should be outlawed? You have said you will be a pro-life governor.
And I will be a pro-life governor. I'm not going to speculate on the future of Roe versus Wade. Judge Kavanaugh wasn't going to do it. Judge Gorsuch didn't do it, and I'm not going to do it as a candidate for. And I will say to you, Shaun, that that I support that Roe versus Wade is the law of the land. It's not an a la carte buffet. You have to accept that it's in the Constitution. But I will govern as a pro-life governor, and I will enforce Colorado's Constitution, which says that state taxpayer money, this has been in the Constitution since the 1990s, shouldn't be used for abortion-related services. It's something that Governor Ritter, Democratic governor, held, and something that I will hold people to as well.
So you won't answer whether you would outlawed or not. So do you think there should be any limits, like a ban on third trimester abortions or counseling before getting an abortion?
Absolutely. I am for a ban on third trimester abortions. I think it's a difference between my position and Congressman Polis's position, which is really radical and really extreme. He wants a woman to be able to abort a baby a minute before that baby would be delivered by the mother. And to me, that is unconscionable as a parent, and I do not support that at all.
So let me ask you about that. Mr. Polis, do you think third trimester abortion should be legal in all cases?
Look, Walker said somehow that I want that. Obviously, I don't, but what I want even less is Walker Stapleton deciding for women of Colorado. Look, when it's about choice, and it looks like, unfortunately, with Kavanaugh's confirmation, the Roe versus Wade protections will be eliminated. So this governor's race is very important, not just for the extreme case of abortion, also for IVF, for many forms of birth control. To me, these are personal freedom issues. I don't think any governor, Democrat or Republican, has the right to make that decision for women.
And you don't feel like there should be any limit on it. That's what you're saying.
I support
right?
policies that reduce the need for abortions, like long-acting birth control and making that more accessible, reducing unwanted pregnancies, which lead to abortions in our state.
So let me ask you this. Do you support repealing the constitutional amendment that bans state taxpayer dollars from covering abortion?
I haven't seen any proposals to do that. Again, I think that we have great service providers like Planned Parenthood who've endorsed me in this race that fill a void of providing services for women. And frankly, without their services, there would be a higher number of unwanted pregnancies that would end with the difficult decision that women face.
Do you think state dollars should, though, go toward this?
Again, I think that dollars should go to health care. I mean, we need to, my goal is to save families money on health care. It is included in many health care plans when there's a medical need. And again, there's a lot of providers that, you talk a lot about the extreme case, Shaun. Nobody ever wants to have an abortion. I mean, it's a terrible thing for women that have gone through. I've had friends that had to face that decision. It's not one that a governor should make, and we should act to reduce unwanted pregnancies and empower men and women with active reproductive health services.
Okay, thank you. One of the most controversial measures on the ballot this year is Proposition 112, which would require a 2,500-foot setback for any new oil and gas drilling. You are both opposed to it. If it passes, it would go into effect as soon as Governor Hickenlooper certifies the election. He has just 30 days. The governor could call a special session and ask the legislature to delay enforcement. Would you support that? Mr. Polis?
No, when the people have spoken, the will of the people needs to be honored. I oppose it. I think it's bad policy. But when the people pass an initiative, I think it's important that the legislature respect that.
Mr. Stapleton?
I would pursue every redress possible for that job-killing measure. And that's where we're different. Congressman Polis has said he doesn't support a 2,500-foot setback, but Governor Hickenlooper has called his energy plans pretty radical. Those are Governor Hickenlooper's words, Congressman, not mine. And the fact of the matter is that he had to plead with you to take a 2,000-foot setback off the ballot just a couple years ago that you were personally financing. It would have had the exact same impact as this 2,500-foot job-killing setback. This is about jobs. It's about 230,000 jobs that are here in Colorado today, and we don't want to go to the jobs of Tomorrowland and the promise of the jobs of Tomorrowland that you're promoting, because those jobs aren't here in Colorado today.
Okay. Look, I will let you address that. Let me just get this quick question.
I just want to be clear, we agree on the policy. But what we're talking about here is the sanctity of the will of the voters, and I think I'm willing to honor that. Walker said he wouldn't. Okay.
What specific idea do you have for increasing health and safety around drilling? Mr. Polis?
You know, I'm no stranger to this issue. I represent many of the communities in northern Colorado that have had fracking in the residential interface, and I've long been a champion of making sure that our local communities, our cities and counties, have a seat at the table around decisions that fundamentally affect our quality of life. There is some local control today, but the problem is a lot of it exists in a gray area. And we need to work with the oil and gas industry, local government, environmental groups to formalize that to provide more predictability and safety.
Okay, Mr. Stapleton.
We have a time-honored tradition here in Colorado of a one energy policy that every governor from Roy Romer on has endorsed. And it's been a great spirit of Colorado collaboration where governors have worked in concert with the industry. Governor Hickenlooper during his time worked on an extensive mapping plan with the industry after tragedy ensued. And he recently came up with a way to cap orphan wells, all collaborations with the industry. And I think you achieve more working together than combatively. And I'm concerned that based on Congressman Polis's radical, extreme past, when it comes to his energy policies, that he would work combatively with an industry that provides 230,000 jobs and $32 billion of annual economic impact to our state.
Thank you. We want to go now to our election partners. We have with us Dominic Dezzutti with CPT12, Marty Lenz with KOA News Radio, and John Frank with the Colorado Sun. Each panelist will delve into specific topics, and Dominic, we'll start with you.
Thank you very much, Shaun. Candidates, first of all, I want to thank you both gentlemen for debating. We were singing your praises on Colorado Inside Out today, that you're doing so many debates, and I appreciate that. Let's get right to it. With these questions, I'll ask, you'll have up to 45 seconds for your responses. Mr. Stapleton, we'll begin with you. For people in the metro area, growth has become a double-edged sword. Cost of living is rising in the urban corridor while wages lag. What specifically will you do to reduce the cost of living in Colorado? Again, Mr. Stapleton, the floor is yours.
Growth means jobs, and jobs means growth. They are inextricably linked, and that's why I've said that my top priority will be to fix Colorado's crumbling infrastructure for the long term. We put forward a plan to do it. New bonding mechanisms from the general fund, which include sports gambling, fixing our broken medical marijuana system. Also, we've done an analysis of Colorado and 8 other states, mountain states, and found out that if we actually spent the same amount per mile on maintenance charges that these other states did, we could have more than $150 million for bonding in the future. This is in contrast to Congressman Polis's radical plan, which simply wants to invest in multimodal transportation, underutilized public transportation and bike lanes at a time when we have to be spending all of our money on roads and bridges and roads. Plus, he's going to drive so many jobs out of Colorado and bankrupt our economy that we're not going to have the tax basis to fix our roads. So he will solve the problem, and the people will be moving out of Colorado. They just won't be moving back.
Thank you. Mr. Polis.
Well, you know, it seems like every time Walker talks, it's noun, verb, Jared Polis, noun, verb, Jared Polis. I'm here to tell you about my plans. And look, we have to invest in infrastructure because while growth is very important, we need to make sure that growth actually works to improve the quality of life for Colorado families. Because what does growth mean when we have a 3% unemployment and it's very low? But for many families, you may have gotten a raise, but your rent's gone up more. Your 15-minute commute is now a 35-minute commute. Young families struggle with the high cost of childcare, and we're focused on making more preschool and kindergarten options available and saving families money on health care. So it's about how can we, yes, take this amazing economic growth engine, and as somebody who's created hundreds of jobs, who's started companies, who's met payroll, I bring that real-world practical experience to the governorship, and I can make growth work for every Colorado family.
Mr. Post, we'll begin with you this question. In a recent interview, both of you said that you would welcome Amazon HQ2 coming to Denver, bringing its 50,000 employees. Under the right conditions, though, what would represent the right conditions for Amazon to be welcomed back to Colorado, or welcome to Colorado, rather? Mr. Polis.
You know, Dominic, that's a great example because it's everything about growth writ large, right? It's in one package of 50,000 jobs, but it's the same issues we deal with in 5 packages of 10,000 jobs. So it's really a question of where and how we do it, right? We can't take that anywhere without driving up the already high costs of housing, without increasing traffic on our roads. But if you look at the metropolitan area and you work with large employers to attract them, help create competitive areas where people can get to and work, people can live affordably. These are real projects that I've worked on to deliver in northern Colorado. In Summit County, we partnered with the commissioners to do a 40-acre land exchange at Lake Hill to provide real affordable workforce housing for people so that people who work in the community in Frisco and in Breckenridge can also afford to live in that community. That's the kind of out-of-the-box solution that I would look forward to bringing to Colorado.
Mr. Stapleton, what would represent the right conditions?
The right conditions would be a Colorado economy that puts Coloradans first and that solves our infrastructure problems for the long term. Because the fact of the matter is, we're not going to be able to compete for Amazon's business or any other big Fortune 500 company with our crumbling infrastructure. And so I'm for fixing infrastructure, not just on an incremental basis, but over the long term. And we also need attainable housing for young people that are moving here, more workforce housing. And that's going to require a strong Colorado economy. It's why I was one of the earliest supporters of the president's tax plan that more than 70% of Coloradans are benefiting from. If you make $60,000 in Colorado, your federal tax bill has gone from $1,700 to $100. This is another difference with Congressman Polis's radical, extreme agenda. He actually entered legislation to repeal the president's tax cut. He has proposed only costs, $100 billion of spending, and nothing that would actually be revenues that would help grow our economy. And you just can't rack up debt, Jared. You have to find a way to pay for it if we want to have the economic future our kids deserve in Colorado.
And Walker, you just proposed racking up debt. Your infrastructure infrastructure plan, 109, would put the state in $3 billion of debt without a dime in new revenue.
That's not
so
true.
you're talking out of both sides of your mouth.
That's not true
That's exactly what 109 would do, and you know
it isn't.
Gentlemen, let me offer a follow-up. Do either of you support any limitations on growth? Let's start with you, Mr. Polis.
It's not a question of limitations. It's a question of making it work for those of us already here, right? Growth should benefit those of us who already live in this state. I was born in Colorado. We're raising our kids here. Our 7-year-old, he just turned 7, Shaun, just the other day, and our 4-year-old daughter. And, you know, I want this state to be amazing. And yes, there's challenges associated with growth, but there's also opportunities associated with growth to help improve our quality of life, decrease costs for families, save families money on health care, save families money on education, and help make Colorado more livable.
Mr. Stapleton, any restrictions on growth?
No, growth brings economic opportunity. Let me explain to you why Jared Polis is the most radical, extreme candidate for governor in Colorado's history. Here's why, Jared. You have unapologetically proposed a state-run healthcare system, which is $30 billion at least, maybe more. I don't know, at $32 trillion at the federal level, you authored it, so $32 trillion divided by 50. You've said that you are for a 100% renewable mandate, which is another $45 billion. You're for free preschool, that's another $1 billion. And I don't know what else you're for, but you have no way to pay for any of this. And Colorado's budget, I can tell you as the treasurer of Colorado, is $30 billion. You are proposing tripling Colorado's budget obligations and have no revenues to pay for it. Well, let me tell you as treasurer how you pay for it. Here in Colorado, if you're tripling our budget, this may not work at the federal level because the federal, government runs trillion-dollar deficits. But here in Colorado, we have a balanced budget amendment. And so what happens is when you're tripling Colorado's budget, you either take it out on the taxpayer by doubling his or her income tax, or else you pass it through the legislature through a death of 1,000 cuts on businesses.
Look,
and neither one
Walker,
makes Colorado a horrible place to live and work in the future for our kids, Jared.
Walker, you're the
That's
only
what
one
this is
here
about.
supporting an initiative
extreme agenda
that would put our state deeper in debt. Our entire agenda
my gosh. You voted for
is designed around saving money.
A carbon tax
introduced
increase.
over 100 tax cuts in the United States
Talking
Congress.
over each other.
Walker.
We're not getting anywhere with this.
Yeah.
You will have a chance to go head-to-head in a moment. Dominic?
We can keep this rolling. Thank you very much, Shaun. Gentlemen, speaking of economies, they do not grow forever. Everyone has been through an economics class. Recessions come. Frankly, we're overdue. At some point during one of your administrations, you're going to have to deal with the recession in Colorado. What specifically do you need to do as governor to protect Colorado with the eventual slowing of our economy? Mr. Polis, we'll start with you.
You know, as somebody who's created hundreds of jobs and several successful businesses in several sectors, I know the importance of a diverse economy because we always have downturns in different sectors, fortunately and hopefully not at the same time. The last great recession in Colorado was driven by the housing crisis, and I remember hearing from so many families in Adams County and Arapahoe County who had home foreclosures. So there's a premium on having a strong and diverse economy. We need to make sure we have a rainy day fund. We can't afford to plunge the state into debt as Walker Stapleton's plan would do under 109. We need to save money for families. If families can save a little bit of money on health care, if we can go after corporate special interest giveaways and reduce people's taxes that you pay every month, you'll have a little more left at the end of the month to enjoy the Colorado you love. And that's our plan at polisforcolorado.com. Check it out.
Mr. Stapleton, your particular thing you need to do, the most important thing you need to do to protect Colorado, the eventual slowing of our economy?
Well, the most important thing we need to do is we need to find more flexibility in budgeting. And I support what is hopefully going to be a bipartisan effort started by my friend Bob Rankin to update the Gallagher Amendment. It is long overdue. It is antiquated in how it deals with commercial and residential property taxes, and it directly affects school funding. But Congressman Polis is trying to snowball voters here. He's a good salesman. He is the captain, the all-star captain of debt. He literally is proposing things that will triple our budget obligations, Jared. Come on, level with Coloradans, and you have no way to pay for this.
Walker, you're attacking proposals that aren't mine, right?
Yeah,
you're attacking
course,
things that I don't support rather than things that I do support.
Yeah.
I'm here to tell you what I support. Walker's here to attack somebody who's not even running against.
Are you finished with the question?
I know exactly who I'm running against, and Colorado voters do too. The most radical, extreme person in Colorado's history. That's who I'm running against.
All right, Dominic?
Gentlemen, one last question. A quick yes or no, please, since we're running out of time for this segment. Tabor is the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights. It's a huge part of what we do as a budget. Do you support abolishing the spending caps in the Taxpayer Bill of Rights? Mr. Stapleton.
No, I do not. And the spending caps in the Taxpayer Bill of Rights, one of the reasons why Colorado's economy is growing and doing so well is because of the federal tax plan. More than 70% of Coloradans have benefited. It's brought more than, economists have said it will bring more than $4 billion of positive economic growth.
Thank you,
so
Mr. Stapleton.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And he wants to repeal that, by the way.
Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Polis.
Well, what I was going to say is I would support changing the caps in strong budgetary years, and I'm open to having that discussion, yes.
Okay.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. Shaun?
Thanks, Dominic. As you both know, I fact-check political ads in a segment we call Reality Check. I've given some of your ads reality checks and found some claims to be misleading. So I'm going to show you those ads and ask you to explain. We're going to start with an ad from you, Mr. Stapleton.
Jared Polis wants government to take over health care. He'd have to double income taxes, and that wouldn't even be enough to pay for it. And Polis's energy plan is really a giant energy tax that would raise prices on almost everything else. Gas prices would go up, electric bills too. You'd pay more for clothes and groceries.
So, Mr. Stapleton, as you know, Mr. Polis cannot raise taxes without voter approval. Isn't this misleading?
No, thank goodness for Tabor. He can't right now, but he'd like to, because there really is no way to pay for the plans that he has supported. He authored a federal takeover of Medicare at Congress. You may have forgotten that, Jared. It's $32 trillion. The only way that would happen is if you doubled state income taxes. He said that he plans to pay for it through payroll taxes. Well, 2 years ago, I was the co-chairman of an effort with Governor Ritter against a state-run healthcare system because it was a 10% payroll tax on all businesses. It's now become more expensive. This would drive businesses and jobs out of the state by the thousands, and it would wreck our economy, and I don't want it as a future for healthcare for my kids or Jared's kids or any Colorado kids. It's cruel. It's not compassionate.
Okay, so this ad is really all about your opponent's ideas. So, and Jared touched on this, you know, noun, verb, Jared Polis. So name one truly consequential idea that you have for healthcare or
Absolutely.
energy.
You know, we've come out with plans for healthcare. We've come out with plans for energy. We've come out with plans for education. They are all on our website at stapletonforcolorado.com.
One consequential idea and how
Sure,
you would
absolutely.
pay for that.
We need to expand coverage to young people that are actually paying more for their home mortgages than they are for their health insurance than they are for their home mortgages. And I've talked about getting a waiver from the federal government so we can get plans for catastrophic coverage for young people who are paying premiums that are unaffordable for them. I've talked about getting more competition for more companies, insurance companies in the marketplace. When Jared voted for the Affordable Care Act, it doubled the price of health care for mothers and children. And we have no solution to fix that. I've talked about working with HCPF and the Department of Health Services to find a way to more effectively manage Medicaid expansion in Colorado.
I'm going to come
I've
to you
talked
right
about
now.
a way of investing in mental health. So this is just a fallacy.
I'm gonna come to you right now.
And Jared Polis has spent $20 million of his personal fortune to try and buy the election. And so we have a limited resource. And I want to make sure that voters understand the deep contrast between Jared Polis's radical extreme agenda and my agenda when it comes to health care.
On this
Shaun, before I
question,
get to my ad, which I'm happy
No,
to,
no,
I
I have a question for you. I have a question for
but
you.
I want to fact check Walker because he said the Affordable Care Act doubled the cost of health care for children and women. Wrong. It actually allowed children up to age 26 to stay on their parents' health care program. He also accused me of supporting, quote, and you can check this, a federal takeover of Medicare, end quote. Medicare's a federal program, Shaun, and I think Walker does that.
Universal Medicare, Jared.
But
and
Mr.
what about
Polis,
the promise if you like your doctor, you can keep it?
Yeah,
Didn't work out so well for rural
Mr.
Colorado.
Stapleton, I need to ask Mr. Polis a question here. Mr. Polis, your Medicare for All-like option would mean the state would pay for health care likely for thousands of people it does not cover now. There would be significant costs as well to transitioning to all renewable energy, from setting up industrial farms and solar installations to building new transmission lines. Where does the money for these two, as you call them, big, bold ideas come from?
First of all, renewable energy saves money. This isn't from Jared Polis. This is from Xcel Energy, the biggest utility provider in our state, who will tell you that new wind energy costs 20% less than existing coal. So the sooner we can bring those good green jobs to Colorado, the more we can save ratepayers and consumers and businesses money on their energy bills, the cleaner air we'll have, which will also contribute to reduced health care costs. We have a 100-day health care plan at polisforcolorado.com that includes setting up reinsurance like Alaska and Minnesota have to move those highest cost cases to prevent them from driving rates from the rest of us, to use bundled payments within Medicaid like Arkansas does, which wound up saving 20 to 30% on their Medicaid payments. Yes, I won't give up till we've achieved universal coverage, which every other industrialized nation has done, and we need to save families money because Coloradans are tired of getting ripped off on health care.
Thank you. So we don't have a plan to pay for it yet. So now let's look at an ad from you, Mr. Polis.
Oh boy, he's at it again.
That's bona fide false.
Walker Stapleton.
This is false.
And false TV ads, now attacking Jared Polis. The true facts? The Denver Post examined Polis' tax returns, and there was never a time he didn't pay taxes.
So, Mr. Polis, this ad suggests that Mr. Stapleton made false claims about your taxes. He did not. Why run a misleading ad like this?
Well, look, I know he has a lot of out-of-state super PACs, Koch brothers, a lot of tens of millions of dollars coming into the state.
He didn't make the claims.
Look, I'm giving him a chance right now. If he wants to disassociate himself with those claims, I'll be happy to take down the ad, but he hasn't done that yet.
Okay. The ad you're pushing back on here never claimed that you didn't pay any taxes, per that Denver Post headline. Just 5 years of income taxes, which you admitted to and you explained. We really do not know what you've paid in taxes over the last 10 years because you won't release your tax returns. How do you square that with repeatedly demanding that Donald Trump release his tax returns?
I've released, as you know, 7 years of taxes.
10 years ago.
And I'm glad I did because it proves that I did pay taxes every year. And Walker hasn't released a single year of his taxes. If he releases 7, I'm happy to have that conversation with him about releasing additional years of our tax returns.
Okay. Mr. Stapleton, let me ask you a quick question on finance here. You have a blind trust. We did talk about it, but you own one of the companies in the trust along with other family members. Are we to believe this investment is truly blind?
Yeah, it's absolutely truly blind. It's a private company. I'm not involved in the management of the day-to-day operations of the company. And unlike Congressman Polis, when I became treasurer, I put my assets in a blind trust. He put less than, I think, according to your report, Shaun, less than 15% of his assets, which is not blind. That's a trust that can see pretty well. He has multiple conflicts of interest with dozens and dozens of LLCs, and he keeps saying he released his taxes, but that was before he didn't pay taxes for 5 years. Then he became a congressman, and his wealth doubled.
You just said it again. I pay taxes every year, Walker, and we proved that. And you just repeated what the ad said.
Jared, you just admitted you didn't pay taxes. You admitted
I pay taxes
for 5
every
years.
single year.
And it doesn't mean you didn't have income, right?
Walker,
because just
I pay taxes every year, and I release my taxes to prove it.
For 5 years, you didn't pay taxes, Jared.
I pay taxes every one of those 5 years.
I have a way of resolving this. I have a way that we can solve this. You both have told me that you will release recent tax returns if your opponent does. So will you both commit?
That's right, but not from my blind trust, because I have a true blind trust, unlike Congressman Polis, who has a phony blind trust.
I am asking, let me make this clear. I am asking for recent tax returns. You've both said, if this guy releases it, I'll release it. If this guy releases it, I'll release it. Will you release recent tax returns before ballots go out? That's in the next 2 weeks.
I will do it if Walker releases 7 years to catch up with where I am.
No, she said 5.
And then we'll move forward with 3.
I said recent tax returns.
Well, you have to catch up with where I am. I've released 7 years. You've released 0.
Come on.
And of course all the trusts. From every trust. Any trust associated with Walker Stapleton in California or Connecticut or wherever.
Then, Jared, the whole reason I set up the trust was to avoid conflicts of interest, something you chose not to do.
I did choose to do it. I set up a blind trust.
No, you didn't.
It's approved by the ethics committee.
Oh, my God.
We've got to get back to our panel.
You're listed as your own trustee.
This is ridiculous.
Okay, we got to get back to our panel.
I think voters
you are
want to
not
actually
release...
focus on your plans to bankrupt Colorado and my plans to save Colorado, not taxes.
Will you release your tax returns? He said he will.
He's asking me to release my blind trust, and then the whole reason. That's what he said. No, that's what he said. No, I'm not interested in getting in a food fight with him.
Okay, so you will.
And Shaun, to be fair, the media has been very critical on both of us here.
I have. That is true.
And that's fair. But again, I think that the ask,
we'll consider it. We'll consider it. But I bet you if we do, he won't. So that's the thing.
We'll come back to this later.
But he'll be happy to scrutinize mine. You'll be happy to
years of tax returns.
20 years ago. It's irrelevant.
Gentlemen, we need to go back to the panel now. Marty Lenz is waiting from KOA News. He has some questions about transportation and growth. Marty?
Thank you, Shaun. Thank you, gentlemen. The questions I have, are pertinent questions for the state of Colorado, but in particular to KOA News Radio listeners dealing with transportation and growth and traffic. I don't need to tell both of you gentlemen, some would say that Colorado's population has exploded. Well, it has expanded by 13% in the last decade. The state budget has increased by 57% at that same time, yet the state did not increase spending on the transportation infrastructure that the population seems to require based on that growth. So do you support a sales tax increase to fund road construction in Colorado? And I'll start with you, Mr. Stapleton.
No, I don't. And the reason I don't is because even though I understand the need to fund transportation, I'm concerned that less than 60 cents on the dollar of that money actually goes to roads and bridges. I think our transportation needs are so acute in Colorado that if we're going to pass a sales tax increase, we need to make sure that it's spent on roads and bridges and roads, and not multimodal transportation like Congressman Polis's radical extreme plans for our transportation fixes, and that's not happening in this. And John Suthers, the mayor of Colorado Springs, a great friend who's endorsed me, he already passed through his leadership $50 million of revenue increases at the local level. If he were to sign on to this, Marty, Colorado Springs becomes the highest tax city in the state of Colorado in terms of sales taxes, and he trades the $50 million that he raised through 2 infrastructure increases for $15 million on a pro rata basis. That deal doesn't work for Colorado Springs. So I would support something more well thought out, which will happen when I am governor of this state.
Mr. Polis.
You know, Walker just said that buses and light rail and bikes are somehow radical. These are actually ways real Coloradans get to work. And yes, I've worked to deliver lane expansion projects along Highway 36, Westminster, Broomfield, Boulder, worked to deliver federal support for Highway 25 North in the Loveland, Fort Collins area. And yes, we need to include additional options to provide more freedom of transportation to allow people to save money and get to work quicker. I'm a supporter of making sure that in addition to lane expansion, we have different ways that people can get to work. Look, I support the concept of having a dedicated funding source for bonding. The sales tax is not my first choice, and I don't think it's good to go into debt to the tune of $3 billion without any additional revenue, which is what 109 and Walker Stapleton would do for our state.
Mr. Polis, I'll start with you on this next question. You alluded to the bonding. Do you think that either Proposition 109 or 110 are viable solutions? And if you do support setting aside state money for road construction, how would you make room for that in the budget?
Look, so if I think you're talking about a scenario now where they both fail, that means that it'll be up to the governor to really lead the path forward to meet the future infrastructure needs of our state, which really affect our quality of life. I mean, time in traffic is not only over $600 a year in extra wear and tear in your car and lost productivity, it's time away from family. So I will look forward to using the governorship to be a convener in chief, to pull together and unite Republicans and Democrats, people from Western Colorado, Southern Colorado, the Denver metropolitan area and Eastern Colorado, people across the spectrum, including the business community, to make sure we have the very best plan to prepare for not only where Colorado is today, but also where we are with regard to our growth in our future. I just want to add that part of infrastructure to me means internet and high-speed internet access and rural broadband. Because when we interconnect our communities, we enable telecommuting, we reduce healthcare costs through telemedicine, and yes, it helps get cars off the road because people have the ability to work from home and do what they do and support themselves.
Your thoughts, Mr. Stapleton?
Well, convener in chief sounds like Washington, D.C. talk to me. We need a dedicated revenue source from the general fund, multiple dedicated revenue sources that we can apply to transportation for the long term. I've provided them. Congressman Polis has not. He's not provided any way to pay for transportation except to convene people and talk about the need. I opposed, when I was treasurer, Director Bott's plan to spend $150 million on new offices for bureaucrats while all of the rest of us sat in traffic. That was not a priority that I supported. Unfortunately, it was a priority of the governor and a priority that Congressman Polis supported. And we needed to actually spend that money on our roads and infrastructure. And I believe that we need to solve it not just on a one-year basis, but over the long term. Even if both of these ballot initiatives pass, they're not going to be enough money to fund our infrastructure for the long term. I have a plan to do it. He has a plan to spend money, cost Colorado jobs, and wreck our economy.
Philosophical question. Is it the state's responsibility to build infrastructure and build roads, or do you believe in some sort of public-private partnership? Again, Mr. Stapleton.
I think it is the state's responsibility. And I think managed lanes can work in terms of public-private partnerships. People don't like them. But we need to solve this. If we want to have the infrastructure that makes Colorado a world-class city, that makes people psyched to move here from the East Coast to the West Coast and live their lives here, we need a first-class infrastructure system. We do not have that right now. We have a crumbling infrastructure system. And Congressman Polis wants to waste money on stuff that is underutilized, like public transit and bike lanes. And I'm not disparaging that, Congressman, but we have an acute need for roads and bridges, to fix I-70, to fix I-25, and you want to spend money elsewhere. I actually want to spend it where we need it the most.
Mr. Polis?
Well, look, you said that even 109 and 110 aren't enough money for big spender Walker Stapleton. Look, we only have so much money in this state, and if the voters don't approve those, we're going to need to find other ways to pay for transportation. And yes, public-private partnerships absolutely have a role. It's also a role of the state to make sure that they actually benefit people and can provide the needed connectivity. There's no way that public-private partnerships can meet all of the infrastructure needs of our state. They only work along heavily trafficked corridors. In fact, that's a big part of how we would pay for rail, with the private-public partnership that would bond from future ticket receipts, that would advance the money to help connect from the suburbs to the existing light rail and system in Denver. Transportation is about moving people. And when you allow people different ways of commuting, whether it's light rail and bus, it's up to you to take them. And if you choose to, because if they can get you to work quicker and you can save money on gas and on car payments, that helps put more money in your pocket to enjoy the Colorado you love.
I'm going to dovetail on that question in the sense in regards to mass transit. The reality is, both you gentlemen know, you're not going to be able to build your way out of this. In fact, the road construction projects we have now, you're building for 2,000. At some point, something's got to give. And one of those answers potentially is mass transit. You obviously both have different ideas. I think a lot of Coloradoans like the idea of having freedom as well. But at one point, do you maybe tell the electorate and tell people that we're not going to build our way out of this, and you either have to accept sitting in traffic for 90 minutes on a commute, maybe have to move away, or say the reality is you're going to have to be to some degree coerced to use mass transit and build that infrastructure out and invest in that. Mr. Polis.
Well, look, I don't think that's something that, it would be a failure of leadership if a governor were not able to solve this problem. We have the plan to do it at polisforcolorado.com, to build a coalition, urban, rural, Republican, Democrat, the business community, to make sure we invest not only in our current transportation needs, but we meet the needs of a growing state in the future. And yes, that includes multimodal, of course. It includes freedom of transportation and different options. It includes rail, it includes lane expansion. It includes fixing our bridges. And it includes the difficult discussions. And I think Walker's opposed every funding measure, but wants to plunge the state deeper into debt just to dig out of where we are today. I'm willing to have that discussion with Republicans and Democrats from across the state and make the tough decisions to make sure that we can retain that amazing Colorado quality of life and reduce your traffic, not only on your way to work, but even if you want to go to the mountains or the great open spaces on weekends.
Mr. Stapleton, you have the last word on this subject.
The last word is that for Colorado to compete as a world-class city, we have to fix our infrastructure over the long term and not over an incremental basis, has been the plan for the last 2 times we've tried to solve infrastructure. And we can't just go to the taxpayers and ask for more money all the time like Congressman Polis wants to do. When I was treasurer in my first term, I passed debt consolidation. It totally reorganized the way Colorado issues its debt. Unfortunately, the Department of Transportation and Higher Ed weren't subject to that, had broad bipartisan approval, Congressman. And we don't have the accountability for how CDOT is spending money right now. And if we did, we would maybe better understand why we are spending more per mile on maintenance and other associated charges than more than a half dozen other mountain states. And so I want accountability, responsibility, and transparency in government. Congressman Polis just wants to soak taxpayers to pay higher taxes and probably maybe as an incentive to move them out of Colorado.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you, Marty. So now for the segment you guys have been waiting for, a chance for you to question each other. This time we're going to have some time limits around it. You'll have 30 seconds to ask the question, a minute to answer, and we had a coin toss before we started the debate, and Mr. Stapleton, you won and opted to go first.
Congressman Polis, I have a friend named Martin. He's a U.S. citizen from Mexico. He's been working for 10 years plus in the energy industry. He's actually just bought his first house. He has a happy life. But you're working against him. You've talked about a Colorado where his job doesn't exist. You've supported anti-fracking initiatives. You've supported anti-pipeline initiatives. You've talked about rigging the game for renewables to a 100% renewable economy where fossil fuels don't exist. Level with Martine. When you make his job obsolete and renewables don't come flooding back to Colorado in the form of a wrecked economy and a busted budget, what do you say to him? What do you say to Martine?
Hey, Martine, I'd be honored to have your support. I'm proud to be supported by the pipe fitters and electrical workers. If you're a member of one of those two organizations, hopefully you've heard our story and what I'm going to do for you. If you're not, again, I'm going to put worker safety first, make sure we improve the quality of life for workers. I'm going to save you money on health care, help you save up money to help make that down payment on your home and make your mortgage. If you have young kids, Martine, I know you're struggling with a high cost of child care, because you know what? In our state, we only have half-day kindergarten. Even Oklahoma has full-day preschool and kindergarten. And you know what? If you're very low income, you get it free in our state. If you're wealthy like Walker and I, you can afford it for your kids. We were able to. But if you're middle class, Martin, and you're working hard, I know you're struggling with a high cost of daycare. We're going to do something about it. We're going to get to full-day kindergarten in our first term with the legislature, and we look forward to expanding preschool slots and making sure I'm going to do everything that I can to make sure that you are positioned to not just get by, but thrive in today's and tomorrow's economy.
Okay, now, Mr. Polis, your question for Mr. Stapleton.
Walker, what do you like to do with your kids on weekends? That's a joke. I'll make it a little tougher than that. So, Walker, on health care, you've talked about phasing out the Medicaid expansion in Colorado, and you've said we can't afford the exchange. Combine those provide health care today to 600,000 Coloradans. In addition to them, for 600,000 Coloradans losing their health care, throwing all those people into the uninsured pool drives up the rates for everybody else. What's your plan for those 600,000 people that you throw off of health care?
Well, first, my plan is to tell them that your characterization is an age-old political scare tactic. I don't plan to kick anybody off. I've said that we have a moral obligation, Congressman, to make Medicaid affordable, because half of the Medicaid population in Colorado today are kids, even though they only represent about a quarter of the cost. And as I have 3 kids, 10, 7, and 4, I want to make sure that they have the best health care outcomes. But I've said we need to manage Medicaid expansion better in Colorado. I've said we need to review the health care exchange, because most big providers have left the health care exchange. There's only a few remaining, and the ones that have left haven't been able to keep premiums and the cost of health care in check. In western Colorado, we have 14 counties where people have one choice of health care provider, have had 70% premium increases under the Affordable Care Act that you supported, and have very little choice when it comes to health care plans. That's not a Colorado I want for Coloradans in the future, and you'd make that problem worse. You would drive our health care off a cliff through universal care, which you sponsored at the federal level. Thanks for the correction. And you want to bring that to the state of Colorado. Governor Ritter and I opposed this measure because it would bankrupt Colorado, and you want to actually bring it back and bankrupt our state in the process.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Now, John Frank with the Colorado Sun is going to finish up our panel section. John?
Thanks, Shaun. For this segment, we'll touch on a number of hot topics, and for each question, you'll have about 30 seconds to answer, and I will provide opportunities for response as necessary. Let's start on immigration. Mr. Polis, do you support making Colorado a sanctuary state for immigrants here illegally?
No.
And would you extend state services to immigrants here illegally, and how?
Well, we do. I mean, people who are paying taxes, of course, there's kids in schools. This, of course, needs to be addressed at the federal level. As governor, we have to do the best we can with what we have. And of course, we want to make sure that we can protect our communities, that we empower local law enforcement to be able to use their limited resources to keep our communities safe. It's important that we allow access to education for the next generation of dreamers or aspiring Americans that will hopefully someday be able to be American citizens when they work it out at the federal level.
Mr. Stapleton, you oppose the concept of sanctuary cities and states. Would you ask your administration to check a person's immigration status before providing any services?
No, I would not. I have narrowly defined sanctuary cities to be individuals who have entered this country illegally and committed a felony type offense, John. Those are the people that I've defined that we should not be giving safe harbor to. Those are the people that law enforcement is asking that the Colorado have a uniform policy so that local municipalities can deal with ICE detainers properly, so that sheriffs, I have more than a dozen major county sheriffs who've endorsed me, don't have to be in legal limbo or legal jeopardy for simply keeping somebody who's committed a felony incarcerated and keeping their communities safe. I, too, support the Dreamers, but our immigration problems are a federal problem, and Congressman Congressman Polis has been in Congress for 10 years. The federal government hasn't fixed our immigration problems, and they need to. And Colorado has had to deal at a state level with a very broken immigration system.
Real quickly, I heard you say you support Dreamers. Does that mean you support giving them permanent legal status here in the United States? I
would support any efforts that were restrictive to their enjoying their way of life in Colorado as contributing members to our state.
Very good. And now to the topic of guns. Mr. Stapleton, do you support the bipartisan red flag bill that was proposed in the legislature earlier this year? It gave judges the ability to temporarily remove guns from mentally unstable people. Is this something you would sign?
No, I did not support it, and I didn't support it, John, because I thought it was ill-conceived and it was rushed. And if you talk to sheriffs, the head of the Colorado Sheriff's Association, other individuals that had supported me at the sheriff level, and at the DA level, and at the law enforcement police officer level, they told me that they thought this was rushed, didn't apply due process. And if you talk to people at the county level, many counties in Colorado already have a process for adjudicating a situation where somebody with a mental health problem has a gun. And so I was not convinced that this extra regulation equally respected due process. And this is a difference between me and Congressman Polis. I respect the Second Amendment. It's critical to Colorado's way of life in the future. Our outdoorsmen, our hunters, our fishermen, he wants to take people's guns away and pass municipal laws that will do nothing to stem the tide of gun violence. I do not support that. That is trampling on people's Second Amendment rights, and that is not the Colorado way.
Quickly, Mr. Stapleton, do you support universal background checks on firearm purchases?
I do, and we had great universal background checks, and we still do in place before the misguided gun laws a couple years ago that didn't at all reduce gun violence, and instead criminalized somebody who was a farmer giving a shotgun to his son or a neighbor to go hunting for a day. And I thought it was misguided, and I thought it was extra regulation that didn't respect Colorado's Second Amendment rights.
Just to be clear, those 2013 laws included a universal background check, which you just said you support. Yeah. Mr. Polis, do you support the bipartisan red flag bill from the legislature earlier this year?
I do, and for a change, I actually agree with Walker. There's a difference between us on this issue. I support our entire Constitution and our freedoms and our rights, of course, including the Second Amendment and our right to bear arms. But that doesn't mean that a parent who has a child who's in a mental health crisis shouldn't be able to go to a judge and seek an order to temporarily restrict their access to guns. It doesn't mean we shouldn't have universal background checks in our state. And I think while Walker said yes, he then said that he didn't support the expansion of universal background checks, which was, as you pointed out, John, in that package of gun safety bills from a few years ago. So I think we can honor our Second Amendment rights, protect the rights of those who keep guns for home defense, of hunters, and of sportsmen, and at the same time move forward on gun safety, which won't stop every incident of gun violence, but can absolutely make Colorado a safer place for all of us.
Real quickly on that point, Mr. Polis, what additional gun restriction specifics do you believe we need here in Colorado?
I do support the red flag law that you talked about. I support better security measures for gun stores. We had over 400 guns that were stolen from gun stores in the last year. I support restoring gun ownership rights to people who have been convicted of prior marijuana convictions and lost those rights because they too deserve to have their rights under the Second Amendment restored.
Now, we asked the readers of the Colorado Sun for their questions, and one of the topics that was mentioned by multiple people was the issue of pardons. Mr. Stapleton, how would you use your pardon power?
I would use it on a case-by-case basis, very sparingly. And John, not to go back to another point, but the 2013 laws were expanded background checks. We already had background checks in place prior to the 2013 laws, and I supported those background checks. I do not believe, and I continue to not believe, that the expanded background checks from 2013 have meaningfully reduced gun violence in any way.
Mr. Polis, same question for you. How would you use your pardon power, and do you support how Governor Hickenlooper has used his in office?
Look, again, I'm happy to say this is one of the 2 or 3 times in the debate that Walker was correct, where this needs to be done on a case-by-case basis. There's no way that you can get into saying who or what kind of crime you could pardon. The only thing that I've talked about, though, as an extension of that, is taking a look at people that were convicted for prior marijuana offenses under an activity that is now legal in our state constitution, approved by the voters, regardless of what you may think of it, and see if there's a way to expunge or pardon people who've served their term, to allow them to not have that on their background when they're applying for jobs, because it's not against the law today.
Mr. Polis, Mr. Stapleton raised this question earlier, and I didn't hear an answer. I'm interested, do you support any tax increase to generate revenue for your priorities, and how would you spend it?
Again, there's none on the ballot this year that I'm supporting in our state. It's not a power of the governor to increase taxes or the legislature. It's up to the people. And by the way, that's in Tabor, and I support that. I would oppose any efforts to remove the people from this equation. I think it's up to governors to play a role in building the coalition. And what you have to show voters is that you've done the most with what you have if you're ever asking for more. Our tax plan would go after corporate tax loopholes in today's tax code and use that revenue. We would hope to eliminate about a third of today's corporate tax giveaways and use that to reduce the income tax on Colorado families by 3 to 5%.
So if I heard you right, you would support some increases in the corporate tax to close those loopholes, but you wouldn't support any other tax hike during your tenure?
The tax code should work for people, and when we have special interests and lobbyists that have gotten special tax subsidies for them, I'm not backed by the special interest. I'm not taking any PAC or special interest money in this campaign. I want you and Coloradans, and John, that means you, to have a little more money at the end of your paycheck every month, because I know you don't have a bunch of lobbyists down there in Denver.
Just to be clear, groups supporting your candidacy are taking PAC money. Mr. Stapleton, you oppose the current ballot measure to raise taxes for transportation and education. Would you propose a tax cut if elected, and how much?
Well, I definitely wouldn't propose a tax increase, and I wouldn't propose what Congressman Polis is proposing, which is some pretty questionable math. He is the most radical and extreme candidate that will ever be Colorado's governor if elected, because I can tell you Colorado's budget is $30 billion today. $20 billion comes from all of us in the form of our state income tax and sales tax, $10 billion from the feds. Most of that money has been used for the expansion of Medicaid. Congressman Polis has promised nearly $90 billion, $90 billion to 100, maybe more of spending from a universal state-run health care plan that he wants to bring back to Colorado. That's at least 30, 35, maybe 40 billion. His renewable plan, which an independent research institute said would cost $45 billion, and free preschool, which is another $1 billion plus. And John, as I was listening and talking to you, I was still waiting for him to be candid and say how he plans to pay for any of this, because this will triple the size of Colorado's budget obligations, and you either need to pay for it, Congressman, we've had this discussion again, by taxing people through the ballot. We have Tabor as a defense mechanism, which I support, or alternatively, taking it out of the business community, bleeding it out in regulations and fees. Either one makes Colorado a disaster.
To respond to that again, Walker's attacking plans that are not mine. The renewable energy plan that was priced out, it's absolutely not. You know it's 100% RES standard. It's not my plan. It's not the plan that's backed by any of the mainstream environmental groups.
Gentlemen, thank you for this final segment. We'll start with Shaun.
All right, we are running out of time, but we want to tackle a few questions in a quick format. This is our speed round, so we'd like you to keep your answers as short as possible, no more than 15 seconds. U.S. Attorney Bob Troyer told our Rick Salinger that he wants the state, before going forward with things like pot clubs and pot delivery, to take a pause right now. He says that pot is leading to a rise in organized crime, teenage use, traffic fatalities, etc. Do you agree that we need to hit the pause button? Mr. Stapleton?
Absolutely, and we need to fix our regulatory model, which is broken with respect to medical marijuana. We are not going to repeal marijuana, but we need to fix it, and I'm not for the expansion of recreational drugs like Congressman Polis is.
Well, I don't think that Troyer or other Washington, D.C. bureaucrats should be telling us what to do in Colorado. Colorado voters have spoken, regardless of what you think. It's in our state constitution. And yes, we need to make sure we do what we can to make sure it's safe, we keep it out of the hands of minors, and that we make sure that we have the right parameters around a market that works for Colorado.
Dominic, you have the next question.
Gentlemen, would you continue Governor Hickenlooper's stay of execution for convicted murderer Nathan Dunlap? Mr. Polis.
Again, I don't think it's appropriate in a political context to comment on somebody's life, literally. I would consult with the victims, I would read the case, and I'd make an informed decision to enforce our laws.
Mr. Stapleton.
That to me sounds like a non-answer. I don't think it's the job of the governor to re-adjudicate a decision that's already gone through the legal process. And I wouldn't lift the stay immediately, but I would have a review process over a period of time to make sure that what a judge and jury decided was not changed or re-adjudicated by a sitting governor.
Okay, Marty, you're up next.
Would you encourage the legislature to specifically direct school funds to raise teacher pay? Mr. Stapleton.
No, I wouldn't until we got our administrative costs in line, because we did an analysis of our 178 school districts and found out that students have grown by 6%, teachers by 8%, and administrative overhead by 35%. If we had just kept from 2011 on administrative growth in line with student and teacher growth in some school districts, we would have as much as $3,500 more to pay teachers. This is how I would approach fixing our broken education finance model, and without going to the taxpayers for a tax increase.
Mr. Polis?
Well, I think what you just asked, the answer is the way to do that, right? So if we have additional funding from the legislature, let's restrict it to make sure it reaches the classroom, which means either greater teacher pay or smaller class size, but reaching the classroom, not being intercepted by bureaucrats or administrators along the way. And yes, while I think we need to honor local control, I'm willing to tie funding increases to restrict them to make sure they actually reach the teachers and reduce class size for Colorado families.
John?
A yes or no question. Will you sign a bill to ban red light cameras? Mr. Polis.
No.
Mr. Stapleton.
Probably not, no.
Okay.
I'm annoyed by them.
Aren't we all?
So we want to ask you both this question at the end. You know, we always end our debates this way. We'd like you both to say something nice about each other. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Okay.
I think Congressman Polis is a creative guy with bold ideas. He and I firmly support the future of kombucha. He's entered federal legislation to do so. We're both fans of cooking. I'm just concerned that his bold ideas are writing checks that Coloradans can't cash.
Mr. Polis?
We'll have to have a kombucha sometime, Walker, when this is all over together. As you know, we've worked on actually reducing taxes for the kombucha industry nationally with our bipartisan bill. But, you know, look, I think that I would look to work with you in my administration as somebody who might be able to provide some creative financing solutions. And I think we need all the creativity we can around public-private partnerships, around preschool and kindergarten. And you've had some of those ideas in the past, and I know you'll have a lot more going forward.
Thank you both. That was very nice, what you had to say. I like the positivity here in this debate. So, gentlemen, I want to thank you for joining us. This is an important chance, I think, to educate voters, and I want to thank our panelists and partners from CPT12, KOA News Radio, and the Colorado Sun, and 630 KHOW. If you joined us late, we want to tell you that you can rewatch the debate on CPT12 tonight at 7.